Scotland's feminist policy podcast.
Part of what we do on this YouTube channel is try to take you behind the scenes of Scottish politics to see what's going on out of the public eye. And here we're going to look at a podcast from the taxpayer-funded feminist organisation called Engender. Now, Engender is the classic sock puppet charity. The government pays it to say what the government wants it to say, but the government would prefer it to be appearing to be coming from sort of grassroots organisations rather than the government saying it itself. So as you're listening to this podcast, bear in mind that it's been paid for out of your taxes, and we're going to look at a particular episode which addresses the issue of abortion.
So decriminalisation would help to do away with all of these kind of unnecessary barriers that we have at the moment to accessing abortion, and would make it firmly a rights issue, and one that is about healthcare, not a kind of strange procedure that needs added regulation. Just make it as normal as any other kind of healthcare procedure that you're likely to get.
So straight away we come to the central issue with regard to abortion in Scottish politics, and that is decriminalisation. It's already the policy of the Greens and the Lib Dems, and the SNP are clearly pushing it indirectly by funding organisations that are promoting it. So currently there's law surrounding abortion in terms of it needing to be approved by 2 doctors, and there are time limits. But a lot of people in Scotland want to do away with all this criminal law, including the time limits. In fact, Emma Rich, the director of Engender, has said that she sees no reason for time limits at all.
It's important as well just to kind of mention that very often when you talk about human rights in relation to abortion, that you start getting kind of confused with the language. You often get people who are anti-abortion talking about the rights of the unborn child.
Yep, that's right, that's me. I do think it's a human rights issue. I think the unborn child has a right to life. Let's listen to their answer to that point.
And under international human rights law, that just simply isn't the case. There is a right to abortion under international human rights law in specific circumstances, and human rights do not apply to unborn fetuses. And this goes right back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The preamble to that talks about we are all born free and equal, and that's not just by chance that word born is in there. If you kind of go back to a lot of the wranglings around this and know anything about international treaties, every single word, every single full stop is kind of deliberated and argued about. And it was a very deliberate, conscious decision to put born in there to make sure that it wasn't something that was going to stop access to abortion at that time. And then all international law since then has reflected that same language and that same approach to women's human rights, that born women have rights, and that there are certainly a lot of protections for pregnant women to ensure that they've got proper nutrition, to make sure that there is proper maternal health. But human rights start from the point of birth.
Well, how about that then? Case dismissed. Unborn children have no rights because that's what they decided when writing the United Nations Charter of Human Rights. Do you see this attitude? Human rights are the final moral authority. They trump everything else. It's just like a religion. Human rights are a religion substitute for a lot of people, and they function like some sort of holy scripture. Now, is that the correct interpretation of the Convention of Human Rights? To be honest, I don't know. But on the other hand, I don't actually care. If that is what they meant, if they meant to exclude the unborn from human rights, then they were wrong. Or maybe it's been misinterpreted, I don't know. But another angle on this, who wrote the United Nations Convention of Human Rights? Was it not a bunch of men? I thought men had no say over the reproductive rights of women. Unless those men say what we want them to say, it seems.
And legislators are often vastly behind the popular opinion curve when it comes to abortion healthcare. And I think, again, that speaks to the need for more and greater women's representation anywhere that decisions get made. Because women legislators tend to be far less reticent about nailing their colours to the mast on abortion healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, she euphemistically calls abortion healthcare there. Abortion isn't healthcare. An ultrasound scan for a pregnant woman is healthcare. Abortion isn't. But anyway, so the point being made here is that we need more women in politics because women tend to be more pro-abortion. Now, when you hear people talking about 50-50 men and women in politics, it's normally the idea that this is some sort of inherent fairness target. But that's not what she's saying here. What she's saying is that men and women tend to have different views. So if we have more women, it will skew the political process more in our direction. Now, generally speaking, men tend to have more conservative views, women tend to have more liberal views. Now, if your aim is to get more women into politics, the overall effect of that is probably going to be you're going to shift the political debate slightly in the liberal direction, or maybe decisively in a liberal direction. That's a political aim. And yet the government funds projects in Scotland to get more and more women into Parliament. And the general effect of that would be to turn political debate more and more in the direction that the SNP approves of. Now, I've heard people take the opposite view, the converse view as well. They'll say things like, women should never have been given the vote because women are much more liberal, and once your politics heads in that direction, your society declines and everything falls to bits. So if you just keep votes for men, that would be better. Now, I think that argument is wrong, because there's no reason to exclude men or women from the democratic process. These political issues need to be debated, and hopefully people are going to arrive at a rational view of the best way forward for society. Trying to rig it by adjusting the proportion of different sorts of people involved in the political process is not right.
Those people who don't believe in abortion under any circumstances and who use, very aggressive or emotive language actually represent a tiny percentage of the population, and yet they get a huge amount of airtime. You know, whenever it's debated on the news, you will get someone who's pro-abortion and someone who's anti. So it looks like a 50-50 debate. Instead, people who actually think that abortion should not happen in any circumstances and the women should die rather than have an abortion represent probably 3% of the population.
So what we've got now is objection to open debate of the subject. Both sides shouldn't be included in debate in the media. In another section, they also say they shouldn't hear both sides of the debate in schools. In fact, it shouldn't be treated as something that's debated at all. And then that's justified here by presenting a wild demonization of opponents of abortion, a straw man if ever you heard one, talking about people who'd rather see women die than have an abortion. Virtually no one opposes abortion in situations where it would save the mother's life, because looking at it as a moral issue, that's a competing moral claim. Anyway, carrying on with the anti-debate theme.
I get really frustrated when I hear these debates that happen between anti-choice and pro-choice individuals and organizations, because it's touted as, giving a balanced perspective. And it's not. It's really facts and evidence being argued with ideology. And I think we have to stop doing that when we talk about abortion. It shouldn't be facts versus values. It should just be facts.
Radical.
What? I mean, what's wrong with values? Values are perfectly valid. Let's imagine we're having a discussion about domestic abuse. Some men beat their partners and rape them and make their lives an absolute misery. And someone might then say, I think that's really bad. Say, no, you can't say that. We're just talking about the facts. We're not going to have any value judgments made about this. I mean, it's just bizarre. So anyway, what are the facts here? Is it somehow a scientific fact that the unborn child is not a human life? I mean, what are the facts that they're alleging are on the pro-choice side of this? If you look at some of the other arguments put forward, their arguments are full of values. Women's rights, women's autonomy. Are these supposed to be somehow scientific facts as well? No, these are values as well. Having said that, values can be facts as well. There's not a distinction between the realm of facts and the realm of values. For example, I believe that torturing babies for fun is wrong. And I believe that's a fact. It's as much a fact as 2 + 2 = 4. And I'm just as certain of it. It is an objective fact. But what we've got to gain is these women are not trying to so much win the debate as to shut it down. So back to the issue of time limits next. Listen to this argument presented for doing away with time limits. In other words, allowing babies to be killed just before they're born. See if this convinces you.
I think laws create norms. And I think we see right through the whole discussion about abortion this notion of time limits being the most important thing. And I think that discussion is really led by the shape of our law. But in 1967, when the Abortion Act came in, husbands had to give permission for their wives to get birth control pills. We are in a totally different, thank goodness, environment now. And so I think we need a law that reflects not only our understanding of how abortion works and how the mechanics of it are different now, but also our shared commitment to women's equality and women's rights. And that is not compatible with having a law that criminalises women.
No, I'm not convinced either, because there's no argument there. Now, if ever you found yourself in a discussion of the politically correct type in Scotland, then if you want to bluff your way through it, when it comes to your turn to say something, just say, what about black and minority, ethnic, LGBT, transgender, disabled? Just say that and everyone will look at you as though you're an expert. So back to the podcast.
The 1967 Abortion Act talks about women, but trans men also need access to abortion healthcare. It's questionable whether that's actually lawful right now. And so I think there are a whole host of issues for black and minority ethnic women, for bisexual and lesbian women who are more likely to have unplanned pregnancies than heterosexual women.
So there we are, all the usual things. Interesting there though, lesbians are more likely to have unplanned pregnancies. Now I saw statistics once about young people. It was saying that young men who identify as gay were more likely to have made a girl pregnant, and young women who identify as lesbian were more likely to have been pregnant. Now I find that interesting. Is there an association between non-heterosexuality and chaotic early sexual experiences? I don't know, but I won't go off at a tangent at this point. Right, let's go back to the Engender Podcast. Obviously, they need to keep their paymasters happy by including little snippets like this.
And it really doesn't hurt that we've got a First Minister who's nailed her colours to the mast on reproductive health and rights.
Great. So just...
Well, that's your funding application secure for next year then.
If we don't have rights over our own body, if we don't have these kind of control over our domain, if you like, then it erodes so many other rights. I mean, we talk about rape and sexual violence, about the encroachment upon women's bodies in a public space, kind of the harassment and street harassment we get. I really do feel that this all stems from the fact that there is part of women that will always be public, that will always be controlled by someone else. And until we get that ultimate control over our own bodies, I don't believe that we can, then have control over all of these other aspects of our being.
So rape and sexual assault will not be stopped until abortion is decriminalised. So there are perverted thugs who are currently attacking women, but they're ready to call it a day once people are allowed to kill babies just before they're born. I mean, that's too ridiculous to even bother responding to. But what it shows is what an echo chamber these women are in, because they're surrounded by people with organisations that think the same, and they're never exposed to genuine open debate. If they were, that sort of ridiculous notion would soon be off the agenda.
We know from our lives that whether or not to have children at any particular time, whether or not to be pregnant and continue with a pregnancy, dramatically shapes women's lives. And so our choices about where to work, what to do, to pursue education or not, to pursue our interests or not, to pursue relationships or not, depends on our ability to control our fertility.
So that sums up the message of the podcast, really. Women need to be able to have babies killed right up to birth for reasons such as so that they can choose where to work and they can pursue their interests. And notice it's about continuing with a pregnancy. So it's not necessarily an initially unwanted pregnancy. A woman might get pregnant deliberately, but then change her mind, and we need to cover that situation as well. Right, this really is abortion extremism. And as the Scottish Family Party, we're going to fight it. If you want to join us in that fight, do join us. There's a link below. You can join us. We're a political party. Thanks for watching.